You're not distracted because the world is loud. You're distracted because you never decided what deserves your attention. There's a difference. Most people treat focus like a resource they're running out of, like it's something the internet stole from them, something their phone destroyed, something they used to have back when life was simpler. But focus was never passive. It was never something you just had by default. Focus is a decision you remake every single second. And when you stop making that decision consciously, someone else makes it for you. That's not distraction. That's surrender. The moment you let the world decide where your attention goes, you lose the only form of control that actually matters. Not control over outcomes, not control over other people, control over the one thing that determines what your life feels like from the inside, your mind. And here's what nobody tells you about focus. It's not a skill you build by eliminating distractions. It's a form of dominance. Over yourself, over the endless noise inside your own head, over the part of you that wants to escape into something easier, something faster, something that doesn't require you to sit with discomfort. The person who can hold one thought while everything inside them is screaming to move on owns something most people will never touch, their own attention. And that makes them dangerous. Not to others, to the systems designed to fragment them. Let me explain what's actually happening when you can't focus. It's not a deficit. It's not a disorder, at least not in most cases. It's a trained response. You've been conditioned, very carefully, to expect stimulation every few seconds. A notification, a new tab, a thought that seems urgent, a feeling that seems like it needs immediate resolution. Your brain has learned that staying with one thing is inefficient, because for the last decade, you've taught it that the faster you move, the more you get done. The more tabs you have open, the more productive you are. The more you multitask, the more value you create. But that's not productivity. That's performance anxiety dressed up as efficiency. And your nervous system knows it. Every time you switch tasks, your brain pays a switching cost, a tiny cognitive debt. It's called attention residue. Part of your mind is still back on the last thing you were doing, even as you try to focus on the new thing. You're never fully anywhere. You're split across 10 half-finished thoughts, and none of them get your full presence. That's not living. That's buffering. And the cruelest part? You've started to believe this is just how your brain works now. You tell yourself you have a short attention span. You joke about it. You say you're so ADHD even though you've never been diagnosed. You treat it like a personality trait. But it's not. It's a habit. And habits can be undone. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. If you can't hold your attention on one thing for more than 5 minutes, you don't have an attention problem. You have an obedience problem. You're obeying every single impulse that rises up in your mind. Every itch to check something. Every urge to switch tabs. Every thought that says, maybe I should look that up real quick. You're not in control. You're reactive. And reactive people don't build anything that lasts. They don't create meaningful work. They don't have deep relationships. They don't develop mastery in anything. Because mastery requires hours of uninterrupted presence with something difficult. And if you can't give that, you'll spend your entire life skimming the surface of everything and touching nothing real. Now let's talk about what focus actually is. It's not concentration. Concentration is what you do when you're trying really hard to pay attention to something boring. It's force. It's effort. It's exhausting. Focus is different. Focus is the natural result of caring about something so much that distractions become irrelevant. Think about the last time you were genuinely absorbed in something. A conversation that mattered. A problem you actually wanted to solve. A project that felt important. You didn't have to force yourself to focus. You forgot to check your phone. That's the difference. Real focus doesn't feel like discipline. It feels like alignment. But here's the problem. Most people never experience that because they never give themselves permission to care deeply about anything anymore. They're afraid of obsession. They're afraid of caring too much about something that might not work out. They're afraid of looking weird or intense or too committed, so they stay half-interested in everything. And half-interested doesn't generate focus. It generates anxiety. Because your brain knows when you're lying to yourself about what matters. Let me tell you what happens when you develop real focus. People start treating you differently. Not because you're more productive, because you're more present. And presence is so rare now that it reads as power. When you can sit across from someone and actually listen without your mind running 10 other scripts in the background, they feel it. When you can work on something for 3 hours without compulsively checking notifications, people notice the quality of what you produce. When you can hold a difficult emotion without immediately distracting yourself, you stop being controlled by your own avoidance. That's what I mean by dominance. Not over others. Over the chaos inside you. Most people spend their entire lives being governed by whatever thought is loudest at any given moment. Whatever feeling is most uncomfortable. Whatever impulse is easiest to satisfy. They think they're making choices, but they're just following the path of least resistance inside their own head. And that makes them predictable. Easy to manipulate. Easy to fragment. Easy to control. Because if you can't control your own attention, someone else will. and they already are. Every app you use is designed by teams of engineers whose entire job is to fragment your focus and monetize the pieces. Every algorithm is optimized to keep you moving, scrolling, clicking, never landing anywhere long enough to think clearly. Every notification is an intentional interruption designed to create a habit loop that keeps you coming back. You think you're choosing to check your phone, but you're not. You're performing a trained behavior that was installed in you through years of variable reward conditioning. The same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The same mechanism that keeps rats pressing levers. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. It should. Because the moment you realize you've been trained like an animal, you can start untangling the conditioning. But only if you're willing to sit with how much control you've already given away. Here's the method. Not a technique. Not a hack. A method. Start with one thought. Not a task. Not a goal. A single thought you decide is worth holding. It could be a question, a problem, an idea, a memory. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you choose it consciously, and then you stay with it. Not for hours, just for 5 minutes. No phone, no music, no background noise. Just you and that thought. And here's what's going to happen. Within 30 seconds, your mind is going to try to leave. It's going to offer you something else to think about. Something that feels more urgent, more interesting, more important. That's not a distraction. That's a test. Your mind is checking to see if you're serious, if you're actually going to hold the boundary you just set, or if you're going to collapse the moment things get uncomfortable. Most people collapse. They tell themselves they'll come back to it later. They convince themselves that the new thought is actually more important. They rationalize the exit. But if you stay, something changes. Not immediately. But after a few minutes, the noise starts to settle. Your nervous system realizes you're not in danger. Your mind stops throwing distractions at you. The urgency fades, and what's left is clarity. Not because you figured anything out, because you stopped running. That's what focus gives you, not answers. Stillness. And in that stillness, you start to see what's actually true. About the problem you're working on, about the emotion you've been avoiding, about the pattern you keep repeating. You can't see any of that when you're moving too fast. You can only see it when you stop. But stopping feels dangerous, because stopping means feeling everything you've been using distraction to avoid. Boredom, anxiety, inadequacy, restlessness, all the low-grade discomfort you've been medicating with scrolling and switching and staying busy. And here's the thing most people never realize. Those feelings don't go away when you distract yourself. They accumulate. Underneath everything you're doing, there's a layer of unresolved tension that never gets processed because you never stay still long enough to feel it. So it builds, and eventually it starts leaking into everything. You get irritable for no reason. You feel anxious even when nothing's wrong. You can't enjoy anything because part of you is always somewhere else. That's not a chemical imbalance. That's what happens when you spend years avoiding yourself. And the only way out is through. Not through distraction. Through presence. Here's what changes when you practice this. You stop being impressed by people who are busy. Busy is easy. Busy is just motion. Focused is rare. You also stop feeling guilty about doing less, because you realize that 1 hour of real focus produces more value than 10 hours of fragmented effort. Not because you're working harder. Because you're working whole, and whole attention creates whole work. Fragmented attention creates fragmented results. You can feel the difference. A conversation where someone is actually present versus one where they're half listening. A piece of writing that was thought through deeply versus one that was rushed out between distractions. A decision made from clarity versus one made from reactivity. The quality is unmistakable. And once you start producing work from a state of real focus, you can't go back. Because you've tasted what it feels like to be undivided, and everything else starts to feel like a waste of time. Now let's talk about what this costs. Because it does cost something. When you decide to focus, you're deciding not to do 1,000 other things. You're deciding that this one thing matters more than everything else that's competing for your attention. And that feels like loss. You're going to miss things. Messages you didn't see. Conversations you weren't part of. Trends you didn't follow. And for a while, that's going to feel like you're falling behind. Like you're disconnecting. Like you're losing relevance. But here's what you're actually losing. The illusion that being everywhere means being somewhere. You're not falling behind. You're finally moving forward. Because forward requires direction, and direction requires focus. You can't move in 10 directions at once. You fragment, and fragmented people don't build momentum. They build exhaustion. So the cost of focus is the comfort of staying scattered, the comfort of never having to commit, the comfort of keeping all your options open so you never have to face the fact that you're not actually choosing anything. That's what you give up. And for most people, that's too much. Because choosing one thing means admitting that the other things don't matter as much. And that feels cruel. But it's not. It's honest. You don't have infinite attention. You never did. Pretending you do just means you give mediocre attention to everything and real attention to nothing. That's not balance. That's avoidance. Here's the last thing. The people who can focus aren't special. They're not more disciplined. They're not more talented. They've just stopped negotiating with themselves. They've stopped asking, should I focus on this or should I check that? They've stopped treating their attention like it's up for debate every 5 minutes. They decided once, and then they stopped deciding. That's the secret. Focus isn't something you do in the moment. It's something you decide before the moment, so that when the moment comes, there's no question. You already know what matters, and everything else is just noise. That's what makes someone undistracted, not the absence of distractions, the presence of a decision. So here's the real question. What's the one thing you're willing to hold your attention on while everything else pulls you apart? Not what should you focus on. What are you willing to focus on? Because if you're not willing, no technique is going to help you. You'll just keep looking for a better method, a smarter hack, a faster way to get focused without actually committing to anything. And that's fine. Most people live that way. But they never build anything real. They never touch mastery. They never feel what it's like to be undivided. And they spend their whole lives wondering why nothing feels satisfying. It's because they never stayed long enough to see what they were capable of. They kept moving before anything could take shape. So they live in a world of half-finished thoughts and abandoned projects and relationships that never went deep because they were always half-present. That's not distraction. That's fragmentation. And fragmentation is a choice you're making every time you let your attention drift without bringing it back. So bring it back. Not violently, not with shame. Just notice it left. And bring it back. That's the practice, not perfection. Return. Over and over. Until returning becomes automatic. Until staying becomes easier than leaving. Until focus stops being something you have to force and starts being the natural state of a mind that knows what it cares about. That's when you become dangerous. Not loud, not aggressive, just focused. And focused people don't need to dominate others. They've already won the only war that matters, the one inside their own head.